Good afternoon, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about our presentation, which is improving literacy skills and critical skills at Peachtree Ridge High School. Hello, my name is Chelsea Mosley. I'm currently student teaching at Peachtree Ridge High School. I teach both effective skills and a co-taught language arts class.
Hey guys, my name is Thomas. I also student teach at Peachtree Ridge High School, and I teach in a co-taught resource 10th grade chemistry classroom.
Hey, so my name's Daniel Conlon, and I teach at Peachtree Ridge as well. I have a co-taught U.S. history class and 2 resource U.S. history classes.
Hi, my name is Michelle Bishop. I am also teaching at Peachtree Ridge High School, and I am currently teaching in a 10th grade resource language arts classroom and also a co-taught language arts classroom in the 10th grade as well.
Okay, so today we are going to be talking about our local school plan for improvement. So in order to implement our strategies, we had to look at our long-term and annual goals. The long-term goal for Peachtree Ridge is the Peachtree Ridge cluster will demonstrate improved student literacy and critical thinking. Rigor in the classroom will be increased through an integrated approach involving the alignment of assessments with student learning using vertical teaming, E-class, STEM, and literacy strategies across the curriculum for all students. As for the annual goal, Peachtree Ridge High School will improve student literacy across all disciplines as measured by an increase in the overall percentage of students who meet and or exceed on the Gateway exam and demonstrate performance gains on EOCs.
So these are the quality plus teaching strategies that we will be implementing to improve literacy at Peachtree Ridge. And what makes these quality plus teaching strategies so special is that this is what Gwinnett counties will use for students to learn the content, and that helps teachers focus their instruction.
So for Peachtree Ridge, we will be implementing strategies from the Quality Plus teaching strategies wheel across both 10th and 11th grade academics. Danny?
Yes, so like Miss Mosley said, Chelsea said, we have 11th and 10th grade. I have 11th grade U.S. history, and so what I'm working on is summarization.
So the quality plus teaching strategy that I chose is problem solving, and I'm going to be implementing that in a chemistry 10th grade classroom.
I will be implementing the quality plus teaching strategy of modeling and practice, and this will be taking place in a language arts 10th grade resource classroom.
And then lastly, I will be implementing the background and prior knowledge strategy in an 11th grade co-taught language arts class. So first strategy that we will be talking about, a part of the Quality Plus teaching strategy, is the background and prior knowledge. This is where teachers will build upon and deepen students' knowledge through experience, experimentation, and intentional connections. Students' previous understanding and experiences, which is the prior knowledge, play an important role in the acquisition of new knowledge. And in addition, certain prerequisite knowledge, which is that background knowledge, is often needed for students to build understanding of new content. So there will be expectations for both the teacher and the student. For the teacher will identify and capitalize and then leverage students' prior knowledge, correcting misconceptions as needed. They will create opportunities for students to make personal connections to content and vocabulary. And then lastly, we will identify and explicitly teach as needed background knowledge required for the understanding of the new content. And then the expectations for the student. The student will reflect on and apply their knowledge and prior experiences. They will make connections to new learning with existing schema, and then they will correct those misunderstandings and learning gaps. And then for my implementation, like I said before, I will be using the background and prior knowledge strategy in an 11th grade co-taught language arts classroom, where I will build upon and deepen students' knowledge through experience, experimentation, and intentional connection to ensure improved literacy and critical thinking skills. So the outcome, it is expected that students will be able to improve literacy and critical thinking skills with 85% accuracy or higher. They will be using, as shown on the screen, the intersectionality wheel. And if you don't know what intersectionality is, it is a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, or a social problem as affected by a number of advantage and disadvantages. It considers people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of prejudice that they face. And then we will look at identity markers, include race, class, gender, identity, sexual orientation, religion, and others. And, this creates opportunities for students to make that personal connection. This will be a big foundation for the overall argumentative unit that I will be implementing the strategy with. So they will ponder that question: how do our intersectionalities influence our experiences and unique perspectives? So here I created a visual to show my implementation plan. This was a duration of 1 week. They had an opening activity, which is the intersectionality circle diagram, which is where they use that wheel to answer those certain identity markers. And they also had a whole group discussion. So students will self-reflect by exploring which identities have most profoundly influenced and shaped their lives. And like I said, they were going to answer those identity markers. And this sets the entire foundation for the argumentative unit, because students need to understand how their personal identities affect their critical thinking skills, decision-making skills, and argumentative skills. And then on day 2, 3, and 4, they will read 1 article per day and write 1 well-developed paragraph responding to the author's argument by picking a specific claim to address whether they disagree or agree, making personal connections, and then clearly expressing their reasoning, along with a whole group discussion where they can collaborate with their peers and share their personal experiences. And then as for the that was their daily assessments. So as for their summative assignment, they have 2 articles to choose from, giving them that choice, which makes them feel definitely more in control of their learning, which motivates them even more for the implementation strategy to affect them. So students will write an extended 3-paragraph argument about civil responsibility using the paragraph format. And so going back to kind of those whole group discussions, during those whole group discussions, I use techniques such as open-ended questions, allowing time for reflection, and using real life problems, which allowed thinking practice to encourage students to make those connections to real life situations and identify patterns to practice their critical thinking skills. And so overall, the daily assessments, the classroom discussions, and then the practice using the paragraph format based on the articles from, the Washington Post and the WSJ will help students generalize and prepare them for completing their summative assessment. And then as for the results and findings of my implement strategy, in the data chart above, it includes the average of the total scores, total grades for each assessment received for both in-person students with disabilities and digital students with disabilities. So on that first assignment, intersectionality, identity circle diagram, both groups performed well when it came to identifying components of their identity that has influenced and shaped who they are today. For the 3 daily assessments, the students demonstrated an understanding of argumentative elements and were able to justify their arguments with personal experience and evidence cited from the articles. And then lastly, for the summative assessment, the scores were slightly lower than the daily assessment scores, but still showed that students grasped the concepts within that argumentative unit. And then also it concluded that, the digital students performed slightly better than the in-person students through every assessment during the implementation of the background and prior knowledge strategy. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that, along with the data chart, I wrote observation notes that showed that during class discussions, students seemed more interested in the topic and were able to make those personal connections to justify their opinions. And then both students in person and digital were able to collaborate with their peers in the chat and verbally, which showed the most participation that I've seen compared to previous units.
Yeah, so I'm going to go over summarizing, which was what I implemented. So I'll go over the definition real quick. So it says summarizing ensures students recap knowledge, skills, process, and sequence of events. This strategy allows students to capture, reflect, and organize their knowledge to build upon, access, and apply their learning. So that's the definition of it. And I have a little bit of what the teacher expectations are, what their roles are, as well as what the students' expectations and roles are. So I'll go over some of those. So the teacher will design questions during learning to cause students to make connections, think strategically, and apply skills or concepts. The student will frequently reflect on and communicate learning throughout the learning process, as well as the student will use summarizing in a variety of contexts to make sense of problems, make connections, and ask questions. So yeah, that's just a little bit of what the roles are and what the definition of summarizing is. So with US history specifically, so in US history, well, really in high school, students have to pass the gateway. They have to pass a history gateway and a science gateway. So we focus in US history on the obviously the history gateway. So during our time, we will look to go over gateway practice exams and so on, so that they're able to pass it. So it says that it is expected that students will be able to improve literacy skills with 80% accuracy or higher. Students will build writing skills, summarizing skills, and comprehension skills to generate across all subject areas. So how I specifically did this over the 5-day period, we went over the unit of Manifest Destiny. So on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we went through our normal lesson plans, went through PowerPoints, guided notes, different discussions and independent assignments that we did throughout the week to teach the students about Manifest Destiny. And the way we incorporated our summarizing skill was at the end of each day, the first 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they had a ticket out the door. And the ticket out the door would be a question or two that students would have to answer through complete sentences. So it's not necessarily a paragraph, but they would have to recap whatever we discussed that day, answering the questions in a sentence or two. So students couldn't just answer with what they thought the answer was, but they had to give reasoning, they had to explain, they had to summarize why they felt that was the answer. And then on Friday, what the students would do was they would write a 5-paragraph essay going over Manifest Destiny. So explaining what it is. There would be, what they needed to include was reasons for westward expansion. Who did Manifest Destiny affect and how? And then examples. So this was, they would then at the end of the week go over that essay to work on their strategizing technique. So that was the blueprint of the week. And then on the next slide is the results and the findings. So as you see, we have the ticket out the door on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And at the end, we have our Unit 5 essay, which was the 5-paragraph essay that the students had to complete on that Friday. So here we see the scores between the digital learners and in-person learners. We see how they progressively go up through the week and how both students in person and students digitally performed well, with students in person performing a little bit better, which is something that we've seen throughout our history as a whole at Peachtree Ridge. So yeah.
So the Quality Plus teaching strategy that I utilized for my implementation was modeling and practice. Now, modeling and practice by nature is a really hands-on approach to instruction, and it kind of allows the teacher to focus less on what is being taught and more of how that skill or content should be applied by the student. So that means that a lot of explicit instruction takes place, and explicit instruction just means that the teacher models for the student what that should look like in practice. So rather than just saying that they need to do these things, they will show them what it looks like to do those things and how it can be applied in various different contexts. And so in this case, the teacher will use flexible and fluid grouping structures to provide opportunities for students to collaborate with partners in small groups. Because aside from explicit instruction, the practice portion means that it should be guided by both peer interactions and teacher guidance. And so guided practice allows them many different opportunities with that extra support to apply the skill. And then therefore they have more confidence going into it when they reach the independent stage and have to complete the skill on their own. So for my implementation, we used a really specific close reading strategy, which was annotation in a 10th grade resource language arts classroom. And our main goal was to help students improve reading comprehension of grade level text and to enhance that comprehension by using annotation. And so for my student population in particular, reading comprehension is an aspect of literacy that they struggle with a lot. And that is, since literacy is one of the long-term goals of our school, this was a great way to bridge that gap and not only accomplish some things for the long-term goals of my school, but to meet the needs of the specific students within my classroom. And so the way that we decided to do this annotation kind of got worked into our normal class routine. We would have an article each week that the students studied and answered reading comprehension questions about. So using the annotation strategy to see how that affected their performance on comprehension was a great way to implement this. And so students will improve written expression, decision-making skills, and reading comprehension that meets the needs of the student's IEP goals and aligning with the LSPI goal. So they kind of both go hand in hand together and get met in a parallel manner. So for my specific implementation plan, I broke it down over the course of 6 weeks. Since the articles that we look at are, they are done weekly, I just did a 6-week duration and broke up the types of text that the students were reading. I wanted to know, one, how well does annotation affect their reading comprehension? And two, does the type of reading that they're doing and the type of text that they're interacting with have an effect on that? So for the first 2 weeks, we did narrative pieces that they read. And then the next 2 weeks we did informational. And then the last 2 weeks we did argumentative. And so the comprehension questions were all the same, or structured the same way at least, to where they would have some multiple choice questions they had to answer where they directly pull things from the text. And then they would have some short answer questions that were a little bit deeper in knowledge. And then finally, they would have some open response questions where they would have to use their written expression skills to translate how much of the text they understood. And so this is kind of how we structured it and how we moved through that process. And then there was a rubric that was kind of used to assess their annotations, which was the actual strategy that was being implemented. And this is just a visual representation of the results and findings of implementing this strategy. Now, the blue bars represent my first block class. I opted to use one class as a control group to where I could see just if they were able to annotate on their own, and they were told to annotate, but they were able to choose the method in which they did that. So there were no specific annotation strategies provided to them, and there was no key of symbols to use while they pick out specific piece of the text and reflect on the literary elements that were used. So they were my control group to see if that explicit instruction and that modeling and practice really did have an effect while teaching the annotation strategy on their comprehension. And as you can see by the graphs, though my students in my block 1 class, without that explicit instruction, they did perform well, and they performed at or above the passing rate of 70%. My students that did receive explicit instruction and had that modeling and repeated practice throughout the week and throughout the duration of the 6 weeks, they showed pretty significant improvement from week 1 up until week 6. And it didn't seem to matter that they had different types of reading that they were doing, as the numbers consistently increased throughout the duration of the process. And so they started out with about a 73% comprehension rating, or a score on their comprehension questions. And then finally, during week 6, they were able to get all the way up to 86%. And this is a combined class average of both my digital and in-person students, since we do hybrid instruction where both groups are taught concurrently.
All right, guys, so the Quality Plus teaching strategy that I chose was problem solving. And problem solving engages students with the AKS through a relevant problem or challenge in order to deepen knowledge and skills and to deepen understanding. There are a couple of really important things to note when using this strategy, and I've divided it up between the teacher and the student. So the teacher's role when implementing problem solving is to explicitly model and engage students in problem solving process through relevant and real world problems. The key word there is real world problems. You want your problem that students are solving to be something that is tangible and realistic. And when you do that, that often increases engagement. Some things that students will do are engage in a problem solving process when given a relevant problem or challenge, and make predictions, conduct research, draw conclusions based on evidence, and communicate findings. The LSPI goal for Peachtree Ridge is to improve literacy. And for this problem, I've kind of adapted it to scientific literacy. And the main important parts of scientific literacy are to make predictions, conduct research, draw conclusions, and communicate findings. So the assignments that the students will be working on to demonstrate mastery will have a lot to do with those topics, right? So making predictions, conducting research, and drawing conclusions. So there's a couple goals that are supposed to be the implementation of this project. These are the goals. And as a reminder, I'm implementing this problem-based learning strategy in a 10th grade chemistry co-taught classroom that will improve students' competency of information processing or scientific literacy. So by the end of this, students will be able to analyze scientific literature for their validity and accuracy, present new information in a way that others can easily understand, and apply content to real-life situations. So this is how my plan for implementing the problem-based learning strategy. On day one, I introduced the main problem, and I'm going to read it to you guys. The problem that students had to solve is the following. You and your team of scientists are competing for a $1 million grant to clean the rampant pollution in the oceans. Using your knowledge of density, design a method, system, or device to clean the oceans. Once you have researched and designed a solution, you will write a scientific proposal to potential investors explaining why you think your team should win the $1 million grant. One of the biggest challenges with problem-based learning is making the first question that students are going to be solving something that's interesting and engaging. So the problem here is that students have to find a way to clean the oceans, and they're going to apply their knowledge of density to do that. So that while students are trying to solve the solution, they're also at the same time learning about density. So the first thing that students will do on day one is divide up into groups of 3, conduct research, and then also they'll be given a graphic organizer and checklist to organize their thoughts and monitor their own progress. And then students will conduct research after they're given a gallery walk to practice their scientific literacy by analyzing, evaluating, and interpreting multiple scientific articles. On day 2, students will incorporate their knowledge of density and research density and brainstorm ideas to solve the problem. And then on days 3 and 4, they will write their scientific proposal, which will serve as the assessment for the lesson, right? So that scientific proposal will be a written essay that teams will submit, and that'll be how I evaluate their understanding of density and also their understanding of scientific literacy. And these were the results. So I divided the assessment into 3 domains. Domain 1 is represented in blue, and that represents their understanding of the content or their understanding of density. Domains 2 and 3 represent their understanding of scientific literacy. So in other words, how well were they able to analyze, interpret, and convey information that they learned to their peers. That's what domains 2 and 3 represent. Something that I found really interesting was that students had a good handle of domain 1, meaning they understood density. They were able to achieve mastery in understanding density, but they struggled in their written expression and scientific literacy. So their ability to translate what they knew about density and applying it to a real world problem, students tended to struggle with that. And that's not so surprising considering the data gathered from the Gateway. That data shows that generally students struggle with scientific literacy anyways. So I'm not surprised to see that the students that participated in this problem-based learning segment were able to achieve mastery in density, but maybe they struggle a little bit with showing their scientific literacy. But on average, they were able to meet around 75% mastery for all domains. And domain 1, their knowledge on density is a little bit higher.
Yeah, so to wrap everything up, we wanted to kind of go over some of our personal experiences this year. Obviously, we were in a pandemic, and with COVID, it makes teaching very different. So we just kind of wanted to go around real quick and talk about how, we had to teach students in person as well as students online, and we did that together. And so obviously, we were all disappointed that we couldn't have students in person, all of our students in person. While we do understand why the health risks and why they stayed home, it's still disappointing. And so we just kind of wanted to go through some of those. So yeah, if yes, Mr. Lewis, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. So teaching in a COVID environment, as it relates to this learning segment, I decided to only administer this learning segment to my in-person students. So my virtual students did not participate in this. This was only in-person students. And that's because when you're doing problem-based learning, it's very open and students have a lot of flexibility and mobility in their own learning, right? And if you're not there to check on them, it's kind of difficult to measure their progress and make sure they're working. So I decided that this segment would not be applicable to my virtual students because there's no way for me to really monitor progress and make sure that for the 4 days that we're working on this project, that students are working. So that's kind of a downside of problem-based learning, I suppose. But yeah, that's my experience.
Great. So I'm actually gonna say part of my experience as well. So teaching during COVID has definitely been a challenge, as we know. Students are having to transition. I personally really enjoyed teaching digitally because a lot goes into the planning and definitely finding new resources, making it very, interactive so students are more engaged and can definitely connect more with the content. So when I implemented my strategy, it was very important to make all those personal connections because that makes it very motivating for students to learn, because if they feel like they're in control of their learning, they're going to obtain more and they're going to want to participate more. So overall, I thought this was a really cool project to do. Michelle, do you want to add on?
Yeah, sure. So I think that kind of going back to what Thomas was saying with implementing this thing and trying to figure out whether, digital or in person was the best. I think for me, I wanted to try to see how this would translate to my digital students as well, just because reading comprehension in particular is something that they struggle with. And on top of with the digital environment, they don't have as many resources and as much support and guidance to kind of get through those challenges. And so I think providing them with a strategy like annotation that can be translated and, they were able to digitally go through on Google Docs and highlight and make the same symbols and make comments in the side boxes. So I was very grateful for the technology and how much that's been adapted for this digital environment that we've been in and the resources that Gwinnett County's provided us with as well. And that has allowed me to do more kind of activities that work for both in-person and digital students. But that's also coming from a language arts classroom perspective, in which things like that generally are more accessible and more adaptable to people online. Whereas, as Thomas was saying, the project-based learning, I'm looking forward to the future where hopefully there will be more options and more ways to engage digital students in that way, in case, goodness forbid that this is something that continues for a while in the future. So I think it's really interesting to hear everyone's different perspective in their different disciplines.
Yeah, and that's what for me, I definitely enjoy having the students in person. I think in history specifically, it's important with those students in person because when they're online, we can't really tell when a student understood a concept or see those aha moments or see if a student is struggling and might need a little more explanation on a certain topic or content. So that's definitely a challenge. But overall, I think it was something that we were all able to what am I trying to say? Adapt to very well, and be able to mesh the two together. But yeah, for me, I think with history, it's just hard when you can't see if the students get the understanding, as well as in history, so much of it can be lecture based. And so it's hard to have those interactive activities and stuff with it being so lecture based. So when it's lecture based, it's hard to tell if a student truly understood it, which can obviously go back with the summarizing. And if they didn't understand the content the first time, it'll be very difficult for them to summarize, which was apparent in my results and findings, that the in-person students perform better than the digital students. But yeah, so that is all. That's all, folks. So
That's
thank you all.
all. Thank you for your time and thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Thank you.